This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 424, entitled Masculism as Post-MGTOW. Description. This flyer claims that masculism will overtake MGTOW as the dominant force in the manosphere, with its angry, hateful approach towards the liberation of men from the manslavery of fluffy parasites, from the hypocrisy of fluffy feminists, by raising men's consciousness that fluffiedom is manslavery, that manslavery is slavery, and since slavery is hated, masculists have a hatred of fluffies and fluffy feminists, aiming to wipe them out by totally ignoring them, then menfairing the gender laws, especially in reforming the divorce courts, legislating the para, etc. MGTOWs are seen by masculists as great psychologists, but as lousy politicians, as apolitical wimps, lacking solidarity with other men, and lacking the political vision necessary to change society so that it is fair to men. The flyer itself. Masculism as Post-MGTOW by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer discusses my attitudes as a masculist towards the MGTOW movement, now that I'm beginning to be interviewed by the manosphere, which consists largely of MGTOWs, who do not entirely agree with the aims of the masculists. I have mixed feelings about the ideas and attitudes of the MGTOWs. On the positive side, I have learned a lot from them concerning the psychology of women. For example, women's hypergamy, in brackets, the female instinct to mate up with a superior man, whose DNA will enable the child of the mother to have superior DNA to hers, which is good for the species, so evolved, and all women have it. Women's red pill nature, that is, that women do not love men unconditionally, but evolve to be able to quickly, coldly, disloyally dump a man whom she feels she can no longer extract resources from. In the distant past, a woman who remained loyal to a man who no longer was capable of providing her and her babies with male-hunted meat, in brackets, due to injury or sickness, etc., was quickly dumped in favour of a more sexploitable man to whom she gave her cunt too. This made good evolutionary sense, since it would increase the odds of that woman surviving, since women have always been parasites of men, depending on men to provide them with meat while they were stuck at home, looking after helpless infants who were born prematurely, so that the half-grown baby's head could fit through the birth canal, with the baby's head continuing to grow after the birth, thus making the prematurely born baby useless at birth, demanding full-time attention from the mother, so that she could not hunt, could not go chasing after game for days on end far from home. Women's monkey branching, that is, the constant lookout by women for a superior male to parasite off. If a realistic opportunity to upgrade to a superior male presents itself, then most women will be quite prepared to dump her present man and latch onto the superior male. This behaviour of women is called monkey branching, since it is analogous to a monkey not letting go of a branch with one arm until the other arm has firmly grabbed another branch. Otherwise, the monkey would fall from the tree. MGTOW teaches that women are always on the lookout to latch onto a superior male who can provide her with a superior level of resources, for example, money, prestige, power, humour, etc. On the negative side, when I'm in a bad mood, I describe the MGTOWs as apolitical wimps. The MGTOWs are not political in the sense of fighting in the parliaments, in the courts, etc., for the menfairing of the gender laws. MGTOWs are not fighters the way masculists are. For that reason, masculists see MGTOWs as wimps, as gutless, as politically useless, and hence to be looked down on. Most MGTOWs are in their 30s, I would say, so that makes them literally half my age. At the time of writing, April 2021, I'm 73, which means that I saw second wave feminism get off the ground when I was already a young adult. I saw with my own eyes the huge effort the early second wave feminists had to go through to achieve their goals, for example, of getting equal pay for equal work for women, equal opportunities for access to the professions for women, the right to terminate, abort, an unwanted pregnancy, the right to fault-free divorce, etc. These women really had to fight, and it was an uphill battle, as I readily remember. Since the rise of feminism quickly followed the male invention of the contraceptive pill, giving women the reliable means to limit the number of kids they wanted, there were soon millions of women in each country who did not want to remain housewives for the rest of their lives, when they had only 0, 1 or 2 kids, for the most part. So they streamed into the workforce to take up the traditional male role of being a careerist. When traditional males resisted this massive change, millions of women got very angry, so they set up feminist organizations to get the gender laws changed to be more favorable to women. To achieve these feminist goals, the leaders of these second wave feminists, who were mostly my mother's age, really had to fight. They combined forces and used their voting power to force legislative changes in women's favour. For example, they took over the divorce courts in the 1970s. They got the abortion right, that is the MARA, the maternity rejection right. They got the politicians to pass the Equal Pay Act, to pass equal opportunities in employment legislation, making it possible for women to enter the professions as a basic right, etc. I remember when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s that women were housewives. I remember one time in my early teens at school watching the mothers of my male classmates at a boys' school and thinking that they were as vapid and as boring as my own mother, whom I did not take seriously, seeing her as an emotional, irrational creature who was incapable of coherent rational thought and thus anathema to my male mathematical brain. So when second wave feminism came along and I got into its literature and ideas, I became an avid male feminist, hoping that feminism would make women interesting, in the sense that I would really be able to talk with such women, these feministed women, expecting them to have interesting opinions so that such women would be capable of really stimulating my brain the way that men can, especially in my two main intellectual passions of pure math and math physics. Unfortunately, that never happened, since women still win only a pathetic 1% of the Science Nobel Prizes, and in fact, the proportion of Science Nobel Prizes won by women in the second half century since the start of the awarding of these prizes compared to the first half century has actually gone down. I watched as the second wave feminists fought and won battle after battle, achieving most of their basic goals by the end of the 80s. It was a remarkable achievement, and one that inspired me to want to see the same happen to men as well. I bought a ton of feminist books and pored over them to extract precedents and analogies that could be used for a comparable gender political movement for men that I called in the early 70s masculism, the obvious male equivalent of the word feminism. In brackets, note, not masculinism, just as not feminism. Thus, as far as I know, I am the father of the term masculism, Although, since the term masculist is so easily coined and so obviously the male equivalent of the word feminist, that I dare say that a string of men have independently coined it over the decades. One of the main lessons I learned from these second-wave feminists was the importance of fighting, that is, fighting for equal rights for women, by using ideological weapons, by fighting in the courts, by fighting in the parliaments, etc. In my mind, I imagined a comparable gender political movement called Masculism that would do for men what feminism did for women. That is, Masculism would liberate men, for example, from man-slavery to women, working for women, putting enormous moral pressure on women to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, that's financially independent persons, by bothering to get a career competent education at high school and college so that as adults they would not manslave men, forcing them to be manslaves to women in order to get a bit of sex from them from time to time. Mascus aim to achieve the following goals, amongst others. For example, to create a FIP society where girls are socialised by parents and taught by teachers to FIP up or rot on the shelf, rejected by men for being manslaving parasites. For the menfairing of the gender laws, especially in the divorce courts, which were taken over by the, in brackets, monoconscious fluffy feminists in the 1970s, and since these feminists knew nothing about masculist ideas, by default they had traditional fluffy expectations of men, in brackets, fluffy equals a masculist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man, manslaving him for decades. Then, with one chance in 4, if he is a father, of financially massacring him and destroying his life in the hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce court system. Close brackets. So see men as cash machines to be abused and robbed, stripping his kids away from him with a 90% probability, forced to give half his wealth and stuff to her, forced to pay for his kids, whom he will barely see. And if the ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony with no legal nor moral pressure on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and FIP up, so that she remains a parasite of his money after the divorce the way she was before the divorce. The divorce courts are screaming out for reform, since no culture that financially crucifies and destroys the lives of a quarter of its fathers can remain intact. Men will snap and go on a sex war because what the fluffy feminists are doing in the divorce courts is so massively criminal that it is a war issue. If the gender laws are not soon men-faired, there will be a sex war where the gender politicians who made these deeply misandrous gender laws in the first place will be assassinated. Thousands of fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges will be murdered. And if the sex war really heats up, millions of fluffy feminists will be shot in the streets so that whole populations are not wiped out as a result of some 2/3 of young men refusing to marry and be fathers due to the awful toxicity of the divorce courts, controlled by the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites who want equal rights with men in the parliaments but behave as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, rejecting equal obligations with men in sharing out the burden of earning the living, by not bothering to FIP up, that is, to get a career competent education at high school and college, to become a responsible FIP as an adult. This is the end of part 1.